The stage lights cut through the tension like knives. Cameras zoomed in on Denzel Washington, seated calmly but firmly at the edge of his chair, his eyes locked on Karoline Leavitt across the polished debate table. The audience could feel it before a word was spoken. Something explosive was about to happen. Karoline, dressed in her signature sharp red blazer, leaned forward, prepared to defend what critics were calling Trump's shutdown gamble. She smirked, rehearsed, ready to spin it as necessary political courage. But Denzel's opening line shattered that confidence instantly. "You can call it courage all you want," he said, his voice low but cutting. "But when families can't pay rent, when kids go hungry because their parents missed a paycheck, that's not courage. That's cruelty." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even claps came from the audience as Karoline stiffened, her talking points colliding with the raw weight of his words. She quickly raised her hand to respond, but Denzel pressed on, refusing to give the shutdown spin a moment of safe ground. "You sit here and defend a government freeze like it's a chess game," he continued, "while real Americans, soldiers, teachers, janitors, mothers, are pawns losing everything. Tell me, Karoline, where's the patriotism in that?" The question hung in the air like a hammer waiting to drop. The moderators tried to keep order, but the electricity in the room had already taken over. Denzel had landed the first blow, and the nation was watching. Karoline tightened her jaw, the red stage lights glinting against her expression as she tried to compose herself. She leaned toward the microphone, her tone sharp, rehearsed, and dismissive. "Denzel," she began, her words dripping with irritation, "you're a Hollywood actor, not a policymaker. You can afford to stand here and moralize about shutdowns, but the truth is, sometimes you need tough decisions to stop reckless spending. Sometimes the pain today protects the future tomorrow." She paused, waiting for applause, but the silence was deafening. The audience wasn't buying it. Denzel leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised, before slowly leaning into his mic with a calm intensity that made her look small in comparison. "Future tomorrow," he repeated, his voice echoing in the hall. "You're talking about a future when people can't even survive the present. Parents missing mortgage payments, veterans turned away at VA hospitals, federal employees lining up at food banks. That's not leadership. That's neglect dressed up in politics." The audience roared, claps and cheers rolling through the room like thunder. Karoline's smile faltered. For the first time, her confidence cracked. "And let's be real," Denzel continued, his voice rising now, his hand slamming on the table for emphasis, "this isn't about spending cuts. This isn't about protecting America's future. This shutdown is about power. Power over ordinary families. Power over paychecks. And the ones cheering the loudest? They're the ones who don't have to choose between rent and groceries tonight." The moderator's voice cut in, "Please, let's stay on topic," but it was too late. The topic had already been ripped wide open. Denzel wasn't just debating policy anymore. He was putting a human face to the shutdown, and Karoline had no place to hide. Karoline shifted in her chair, forcing a tight smile as she leaned toward the microphone again. Her voice, sharper now, carried a hint of defensiveness. "Look, these emotional outbursts make for great TV," she said, gesturing toward Denzel, "but facts matter. We cannot keep raising the debt ceiling, spending money we don't have, and pretending there's no consequence. Hard choices are necessary, and sometimes, yes, they hurt. But what hurts more is bankrupting the next generation. That's what real neglect looks like." Her words landed with a mechanical thud. The applause she clearly hoped for never came. Instead, murmurs spread through the audience, restless, skeptical. Denzel leaned forward, his eyes locked on Karoline like a spotlight cutting through smoke. His tone, low and deliberate, carried more weight than her rehearsed sound bites. "You keep talking about the next generation," he said, his voice steady, "but you can't even look this generation in the eye. How dare you tell struggling single moms and underpaid government workers that their suffering is just a necessary consequence? They are not pawns in your budget chess game. They are real human beings, and you treat them like collateral damage." The room erupted with applause, loud and unrestrained. Karoline's smile evaporated. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. "And let's not pretend this is about saving money," Denzel pressed on, his words cutting like glass. "Because the same politicians shutting down the government are cashing their paychecks right on time. The same politicians are dining in expensive restaurants while workers line up at food banks. You want to talk about fairness? Then start with yourselves." Karoline's face flushed. The camera zoomed in, catching every flicker of discomfort. The audience wasn't just watching a debate anymore, they were watching a dismantling. Karoline leaned forward, her composure cracking, her voice rising above the murmurs. "That's a cheap shot, Denzel. You know very well that members of Congress can't just opt out of their pay. It's the system. I didn't design it, but I won't apologize for standing up for fiscal responsibility. Someone has to say no when Washington keeps spending recklessly." Her words were sharp, but the room wasn't buying it. The audience shifted, some shaking their heads, others folding their arms in quiet disapproval. She had leaned too hard on a line that sounded memorized, a politician's defense that lacked blood and bone. Denzel didn't flinch. He paused just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable, then spoke with the precision of a hammer hitting its mark. "You keep calling this fiscal responsibility," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, "but responsibility doesn't mean punishing the powerless. It means leadership. It means sacrifice. Tell me, Karoline, where's your sacrifice? Where's the sacrifice of your colleagues who shut down the government while keeping their paychecks flowing like nothing happened?" The crowd broke into applause, louder than before, the sound rolling like thunder through the hall. Cameras captured the moment from every angle, Denzel's unwavering gaze, Karoline's strained smile, the audience leaning forward, hungry for more. Karoline opened her mouth to fire back, but Denzel raised his hand slightly, as if commanding the room itself. "No excuses," he continued, his voice deep, resonant, impossible to ignore. "When kids go hungry because food assistance is frozen, when veterans wait for their checks, when federal workers scramble to pay rent, that's not numbers on a spreadsheet. That's life or death. And if you can't see that, then maybe you don't deserve to sit where you sit." The audience erupted into a standing ovation. Karoline froze, her words caught in her throat. For the first time, the spotlight wasn't hers to control. Karoline gripped the edges of her podium, her knuckles pale, fighting to reclaim control. The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker of unease in her eyes. "Denzel," she began, her voice strained but still forceful, "you're a Hollywood actor. You can afford to stand there and moralize. But in Washington, things are not that simple. Governing requires tough decisions. And sometimes, shutting down the government is the only way to stop runaway spending that threatens America's future." The words landed with the polish of a rehearsed defense, but the crowd didn't erupt in support. Instead, a ripple of boos echoed from the back rows. The atmosphere thickened, tension rising like heat off asphalt. Denzel stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the stage under the studio lights. "That's the problem right there," he thundered, his voice shaking the walls. "You think governing is about winning a political game. But while you play chess with people's lives, they're out there losing jobs, losing homes, losing hope. Tell me, Karoline, what future are you protecting if you strip away the very present they're fighting to survive?" The moderator tried to intervene, raising his hand for calm, but the moment was too electric, too raw. Phones shot up across the audience, capturing every second for the feeds that would flood social media within minutes. Karoline tried to interject, but Denzel cut across her like a storm. "You keep repeating tough decisions, but the only people who pay the price are the ones with no seat at this table. No paychecks, no safety net, no lifeline. And yet here you are defending perks and salaries for yourself. Where's the justice in that? Where's the America you claim to love?" The room erupted again, cheers, claps, a chant building slowly from one side of the hall. "No excuses. No excuses." Karoline's lips tightened, her eyes darting nervously toward the cameras. For the first time, she seemed cornered, not by Denzel alone, but by the audience and the weight of her own words. The studio was now a furnace of noise, with the chant, "No excuses," rolling like thunder across the audience. The moderator leaned forward, pleading for quiet, but it was useless. The crowd was already part of the showdown. Karoline's face flushed red under the lights, her rehearsed calm peeling away. She lifted her hand, demanding to be heard. "Listen to me," she snapped, her voice straining over the roar. "I'm not the villain here. Washington's waste is the villain. Endless welfare, endless spending, this is what drives us into shutdowns. If we don't draw the line, America collapses under its own weight." For a beat, silence fell, a silence sharpened by the weight of her accusation. Cameras zoomed in on Denzel, who stood like a statue, eyes fixed on her with a mix of disbelief and fury. Then he leaned into the microphone, his voice low, steady, but heavy as steel. "Collapse," he said, each syllable deliberate. "You talk about collapse while single mothers can't pay rent, while veterans wait months for care, while children are told the food stamp balance is zero. The only thing collapsing is the humanity of leaders like you, who choose politics over people." The audience gasped, then erupted in applause so fierce the stage floor trembled. The chant shifted now, louder, angrier, "People over politics. People over politics." Karoline's jaw tightened. She tried to launch a counterattack, her finger stabbing the air at Denzel. "You don't understand. You've never had to balance a federal budget. You've never had to make sacrifices in Washington." But Denzel slammed his hand on the podium, cutting her off. His voice boomed like a gavel. "Don't you dare talk to me about sacrifice. Sacrifice is the nurse who works double shifts and still can't cover her bills because her paycheck is frozen. Sacrifice is the soldier who comes home broken, only to find the government he fought for has shut its doors on him. Don't preach sacrifice from your cushioned seat in Congress." The crowd leapt to its feet, some shouting, some clapping, some recording the moment they knew would go viral. Karoline's face stiffened, her polished spin shattered under the raw force of Denzel's fury. The moderator's attempts to rein in the chaos dissolved into background noise. This was no longer a debate but a reckoning. Denzel stood tall, his hand still pressed against the podium, his chest heaving with the fire he had just unleashed. Every camera in the studio zoomed in on his face, the sweat on his brow, the sharp blaze in his eyes, a man who wasn't just speaking, but charging the entire system with moral bankruptcy. Karoline adjusted her microphone, forcing a shaky smile that betrayed her crumbling confidence. She straightened her blazer as if to armor herself, but her voice cracked slightly as she tried to regain control. "You think shouting makes you right?" she said, glancing nervously at the moderator, then back at the crowd. "I'm talking about fiscal responsibility. We can't just keep spending money we don't have. If government workers miss a paycheck, it's temporary. But if we bankrupt this nation, the damage will be permanent." The words hung in the air, cold and clinical, and the audience reacted instantly with boos. A few shouted, "Tell that to the hungry." Others yelled, "Pay the people now." The chant began to swell again, louder this time, "No paychecks, no peace. No paychecks, no peace." Denzel let the chant echo for a moment before he leaned forward, his voice cutting through like a blade. "Temporary," he thundered. "Try telling the single father in Detroit who just got evicted that his homelessness is temporary. Try telling the nurse in Houston who can't afford gas to get to work that her struggle is temporary. You reduce lives to numbers, Karoline, but behind every number is a face, a story, a family. And when the government you defend shuts down, those lives are left to burn while you play politics." Karoline's eyes widened, her composure slipping further with every syllable. She opened her mouth to respond, but the roar of the crowd swallowed her whole. Some cheered Denzel's every word, others pounded the armrests of their seats in agreement. The studio lights glared brighter, the cameras captured every bead of sweat, every clenched jaw, every second of this escalating confrontation. By now, it wasn't just a debate stage, it was a battlefield, and Denzel was commanding it like a general of truth. The studio had transformed into something unrecognizable, less a debate hall and more a courtroom of public opinion where every viewer at home was the jury. The moderator's voice trembled as he tried once again to steer the discussion, but even he seemed to understand the futility. The audience wasn't waiting for questions anymore, they were waiting for blows. And Denzel was delivering them with precision. He shifted his stance, looking directly into the camera as though addressing not just the audience in the studio, but millions watching at home. "This isn't about policy papers and spin rooms," he declared, his tone a mix of sorrow and fury. "This is about dignity. You talk about budgets, Karoline, as though people are expenses to be cut, but let me tell you, when a mother is skipping meals so her children can eat, that's not a line item, that's a crisis. When veterans who fought for this country are forced to beg for rent money because their checks are frozen, that's not fiscal responsibility, that's national shame." The crowd erupted, some rising to their feet, applauding and chanting Denzel's name. Karoline tried to interject, slamming her hand down on the podium. "You're dramatizing. This is politics, not theater. Shutdowns happen because the other side refuses to compromise. If Democrats didn't push their reckless spending, we wouldn't be here." Her words cracked through the noise, but they failed to silence it. Instead, Denzel turned to her slowly, his gaze piercing, his voice dropping to a simmer that was somehow more lethal than shouting. "No, Karoline. We're here because people in power choose to gamble with lives they will never feel the cost of. You get your paycheck. Congress still eats. The lights stay on in your world. But for the bus driver in Cleveland, the teacher in Phoenix, the janitor in Miami? Darkness. And you dare call it compromise." The audience was on fire now, stomping their feet, the chant morphing into something new, rhythmic, and relentless. "Shame. Shame. Shame." The walls seemed to shake with the sound, and Karoline's face flushed red as she struggled to maintain a smile that looked more like a grimace. Denzel leaned in one final time, his voice echoing like a verdict, "No paychecks, no excuses. This isn't politics. This is survival. And history will remember who stood with the people, and who sold them out." The camera zoomed in, capturing Karoline's stunned silence and the raw electricity in the room. It was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning broadcast live. The atmosphere had become almost unbearable, like a thunderstorm building inside the studio walls, every clap and shout from the audience striking like lightning. Karoline, usually polished and in control, fumbled with her notes, her fingers trembling as she tried to regain footing. But Denzel wasn't letting go. He had the energy of someone who had carried other people's burdens for years, and now he was unloading them on live television. "Let me paint you a picture," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "A single mother works 2 jobs. She gets home at midnight, bone-tired, but she still has to help her kids with homework. She opens the fridge, and there's barely enough food for tomorrow. And then the government says, 'Sorry, your paycheck won't come this week because politicians are playing chess with your life.' That's not leadership, Karoline. That's cruelty dressed up as strategy." The crowd thundered, fists pumping in the air. Karoline snapped back, her voice cracking, "You're twisting reality. This is about stopping reckless spending, about keeping America from drowning in debt. If we don't stand firm now, there will be no future for that mother you're pretending to defend." Denzel turned toward her, his face tightening with something between anger and disbelief. "Pretending?" he thundered. "Tell that to the veterans who can't get their benefits, the farmers waiting on loans to survive another season, the children who rely on school meal programs that shut down when you play politics with budgets. Pretending? You've never had to skip a meal. You've never had to choose between heat and medicine. Don't talk to me about pretending." The studio audience roared so loud the moderators couldn't be heard even as they shouted into their microphones. Viewers at home could feel the weight of the moment. It was no longer a debate, it was the raw voice of outrage breaking through the polished armor of spin. Karoline tried one last time, raising her hand like a shield. "This is democracy. This is the fight we must have," she said desperately. Denzel leaned into the camera again, shaking his head slowly. "Democracy doesn't mean gambling with lives. It means protecting them. You're not defending democracy, Karoline. You're dismantling it, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, life by life. The chants erupted again, rolling like thunder, no paychecks, no excuses. His words had become the rallying cry, echoing across the nation. The debate had already crossed into uncharted territory, but the climax was still to come. The studio lights dimmed slightly, not by design, but as if the air itself had thickened under the sheer weight of the confrontation. Karoline sat stiff in her chair, jaw clenched, while Denzel stood tall, gripping the edge of the podium as though holding on to the truth itself. You know what this shutdown really is? Denzel began, his voice calm now, but edged with fire. It's not about budgets. It's not about responsibility. It's about power. You want to break the spirit of working people so they'll accept less, expect less, demand less. You're not protecting the country, you're starving it. The crowd fell silent, listening. Every syllable echoed like a drumbeat. Karoline's eyes darted to the camera, trying to redirect the narrative. Americans know we must be strong, we must sacrifice today so our children can have a future tomorrow. Denzel shook his head. Children can't eat promises, Karoline. They can't put future in their lunchbox. They need food, heat, medicine, today. And it's your job to deliver, not delay. His voice rose, breaking into thunder. Stop pretending a shutdown is sacrifice. It's sabotage. The audience exploded. Some leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting, chanting, sabotage. Sabotage. Karoline tried to interject, raising her voice above the chants, but Denzel cut her off with a single piercing line. No paychecks, no excuses, and no more lies. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Karoline's rebuttal dissolved in her throat. For the first time, she looked cornered, not by Denzel alone, but by the undeniable truth that millions watching from their homes already knew deep inside. The camera zoomed in on Denzel, his face hard, unflinching. America deserves better than political games. We deserve leaders who fight for people, not against them. If you can't understand that, then you don't belong in power. And with that, the broadcast cut to commercial, but the moment was already etched into history. Clips would be replayed, hashtags would trend, and in living rooms across the nation, ordinary citizens would repeat Denzel's words as if they were their own. The debate was over, but the fire had just begun. Tonight wasn't just debate. It was truth versus excuses. Families can't live on spin, they need leaders who deliver, not stall. No paychecks means no excuses. America deserves better, and the people won't stay silent any longer.